have some special guests. I'm going to introduce right now Jess, who works for AccuWeather, and he is also the Pennsylvania storm chaser with his friend Ron. He's on equipment back there. And if you want any more information after you leave, check out Jess's Facebook page. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for the storm chaser.
Thank everybody for coming tonight. My name is Jesse Farrell, and I work for AccuWeather up in State College, Pennsylvania. I'm a meteorologist by trade, but I do most of the computer work for AccuWeather, managing their online communities such as Facebook, Twitter, and that sort of thing. But I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania tornado history, the March 1985 tornado, and talk a little bit about how you can storm chase in Pennsylvania. Next. This is a map showing, I should have acknowledged Henry Marcasetti at the beginning there. He's a meteorologist at AccuWeather to help me put this together. This is a map of all the tornadoes in Pennsylvania from 1985 to 2009. And the ones from 1985 are up here in the corner, are tagged with the triangles. And you can see that the 1985 outbreak was pretty huge. And even all the tornadoes since then in the state of Pennsylvania have hardly added up to that. So that was really the famous year in Pennsylvania as far as tornadoes. Next. Real quick, this is the different scales of tornadoes. Many of you may have heard of the F scale, the Fujita scale, which measures tornado strength. It starts out with 0, which is the weak tornadoes, and there have been a lot of those pretty much all over the state. Next. This is the F1s, again, pretty much all over the state, quite a few of them. This is, I believe, since 1950. Next. These are your F2s, and notice now that you start to see a hole kind of in the middle of the state, and I'll explain in a few minutes why things tend to not occur there. Next. These are your F3s, and now you can see that most of them are in the corners of the state, down by Philly and up by Erie, and there's almost none of them in the mountainous areas. Next. These are your F4 tornadoes, which are extremely strong. There's only been a handful of them in the state of Pennsylvania, and the one right there with the long track is the famous Great Pennsylvania tornado of 1985. And as you can see, there's never been any F4 or F5 tornadoes in the eastern part of the state. Next. And there's the only F5 tornado that ever occurred in the state, came in from Ohio. I believe that was in the 1985 outbreak as well. Next. All right, so I was not at AccuWeather in 1985, but Henry, who I mentioned, was there, and prior to that event taking place, AccuWeather was forecasting a swarm of tornadoes. The Government Storm Prediction Center had put out a moderate risk for tornadoes, which is pretty rare for Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, they downgraded that to a slight risk the same day as the tornadoes, but still the local TV and radio stations in Ohio and Pennsylvania were forecasting severe weather, including tornadoes. Next. Even 20 years later, as late as 2005, you could see the scar from the 1985 F4 tornado. Now, the blue line is the official track. Back then, they didn't have a lot of accuracy with the track, so it's a little off. The light area that you see going from the upper right over into here is the actual scar of the tornado on the landscape where there's basically no trees. And this is a satellite shot in Google Earth from 2005. Next. This is just a satellite image of the actual thunderstorm producing the F4 tornado that night. Next. And this is a radar picture. This is what weather radar looked like back in 1985. Henry took a picture of this with his camera looking at the Penn State radar. And any of you who look at radar information these days can attest how much better things are. Next. What Henry and I did, this was actually a 35 millimeter slide, so I scanned it into the computer and then we overlaid it into Google Earth. And you can see Clearfield County here and Center County down there. This is actually the Penn State radar picking up the mountains near State College. But that's what the F4 tornado looked like when it was north of town. And you can see that even back then, with basically radar that was one color, you could see the twisting of the winds and what they call the hook echo, which is where the tornado was present. Next. Now these days we have much fancier information when we look at storms, such as 3D radar, which can look at cross sections or three-dimensional scenes of thunderstorms, and even 3D portrayals of the eyes of hurricanes. So we're obviously a lot better off in this day and age as far as being able to track tornadoes on radar. Next. We also have what's called simulated radar. This is a computer forecast model and projection of what the radar is going to look at a certain time. And they went back and reran the weather data from the 1985 outbreak in one of these newer computer forecast models and had it try to predict what was going to happen. And it did a fairly good job. And this is, when I talk a little bit about storm chasing here in Pennsylvania later, this is a really good tool for your arsenal to help you predict where the storms are going to be. But like anything in weather forecasting, it's not 100% accurate. The storms may not be in exactly the right place, but it gives you a good idea on timing and a general idea of where the storms are going to break out. Next. So now I want to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania storm chasing. Pennsylvania storm chasing is a little different than what you'll see in Twister for a number of reasons. I have never been out west to chase out in the plains, and I'm not much of a big game hunter, so when I say I chase in Pennsylvania, I mean that I follow storms and take pictures of them, but I'm not going to wait around for an F5 tornado, because obviously that doesn't happen very often. Next. I titled this one Pennsylvania the Loser State, and if there's any weather enthusiasts here, and I'm sure there are, there's a lot of moaning and whining when the storms seem to fall apart in the state of Pennsylvania. And there's several reasons that happens, and makes Pennsylvania really not a great state to look for tornadoes in. One thing that happens sometimes is stable air will back up against these mountains here, and when the storms come into the state, they'll encounter that stable air and fall apart. The mountains themselves can also disrupt the circulation in the thunderstorms so that they don't make it very far into the state without falling apart. And up here in State College, something we deal with pretty frequently is just in general the elevation is decreasing. The storms, which are usually moving from the west or northwest, move down into the State College, central Pennsylvania area, and they go down the mountains. Now in meteorology, when a cloud goes down a mountain, it dries out, and that's a problem for thunderstorms, so that's another reason that storms tend to decrease. Now over in the southeast part of the state, there's more of a decent chance of seeing strong thunderstorms because those problems are behind them, and there's enough area here that they can sometimes generate their own thunderstorms during the summer with basically just the heating of the earth. Next. So what are the disadvantages to trying to storm chase in Pennsylvania? Well, it's bad visibility. When you look at a movie like Twister, or you look at you watch Storm Chasers on Discovery Channel, a lot of times out there in the plains you can see for miles and miles, and that's because they don't have very many trees and they don't have mountains. Here in Pennsylvania we've got both, and I can't tell you how many times I've been trying to take a picture of a storm and I've been stuck in a valley with nothing but trees. So that not only leads to not quality photos and video, but also you could get in a sticky situation where if there was a tornado approaching, you might not see it, and even if you did, there might not be, you wouldn't be able to get out of its way. So that's obviously a problem. We also don't have a matrix-like road network that they do out in the plains. When you see these guys storm chasing, they basically say, okay, the tornado's going this direction, so I'll turn down this farm road because everything's laid out in a north-south, east-west progression. But here in Pennsylvania, we have these long mountains that you can't get around, so you can. It could cause you not be able to get to the good stuff, the good part of the storm, but it could also cause you to not be able to get away from a tornado should one form. And obviously, the mountains here provide questionable cell and even satellite reception if you're trying to download data or call in a storm report or something like that. Next. Now, what's the difference between a chaser and a spotter? A storm chaser generally follows weather for the thrill of it, maybe to take photos and videos. National Weather Service storm spotters are there specifically to phone in weather to the National Weather Service when it's severe, and that helps them issue the tornado warnings, because a lot of times they'll see what looks like a tornado on radar, but they won't know for sure until somebody calls it in. And the same goes for large hail and that sort of thing. So you can do both, but you should definitely, if you plan on storm station and you haven't gone to the National Weather Service spotter training, that's something I certainly recommend, because what they tell you there is they educate you on how to identify storm structure, tornadoes, what the clouds look like in the storms, and that sort of thing, and that can be very important as far as identifying what you're seeing. So what does that leave us? If you want to photograph or take videos of weather in Pennsylvania, tornadoes maybe, but it's going to be tough. There's a good bit of lightning here. I know Ron, who's going to be talking here in a minute, who lives down near Johnstown, he and I take quite a bit of lightning photos and videos, and you can get some pretty good shots of that in Pennsylvania, provided you're at a place where you can actually see. And by me being a meteorologist, I'll take pictures of clouds, rainbows, snow, whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Next. So how do you chase in Pennsylvania? Well, first of all, safety is number one. It's good to have an emergency light for your car that identifies you if you happen to be pulled over on the side of the road. I know it sounds silly, but you don't want to text while driving, and you want to use a hands-free phone, because if you do storm chase, you will be tempted to do both of those while you're driving. If you see severe weather, you want to call it into the National Weather Service first, and then before you take video or talk about it on Facebook or whatever. And one thing I can't stress enough is that lightning is really a big danger in Pennsylvania versus the plains. When the company that runs the lightning sensors across the nation came to AccuWeather a couple years ago, they showed us some research that answered a question that I had for a long time, which is, why don't more storm chasers get struck by lightning? They seem to whoa. Speaking of getting struck by lightning, that's a good sound effect. If you think of these guys out there on the plains watching the tornadoes, and like I said, there's no trees, so you'd think they would just be magnets for lightning, but so far as I know, a storm chaser or photographer has never been struck or killed anyway by lightning. And the short answer to that, these guys said, was that if they're in the right place where the severe weather is, the type of storms that they get out on the plains actually don't have a lot of lightning right around where the tornado and the really high winds and hail are. So it's not just that they're lucky, but they're in the right place. Now, unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, because our storms don't have the same structure, you can't depend on that, and there could be lightning anywhere in a storm in Pennsylvania. And I urge you that if you are out there trying to take pictures of storms, that you leave your camera set up on a tripod outside the car and get in the car as soon as you're anywhere close to lightning, because it's something you don't want to fool with at all. If you go chasing, you want to bring multiple communication devices. Cell phone, if you're a ham person, obviously you'd be talking on the ham. On the amateur radio, you want to have multiple weather data and alerting sources in case one goes down. If you're trying to figure out whether there's a warning in effect for you, or you're looking at the radar and lightning strikes and that sort of thing. Multiple cameras are always good. I know Ron and I both use 3 or 4 cameras or video cameras when we're out chasing, because sometimes you want to get a close-up shot, and other times you want to be zoomed out. And you want to bring car and human repair kits. And Ron and the Red Cross are going to talk a little bit about the safety kits that you can bring with you, because you never know what kind of situation that you could get in. You could either anywhere from a flat tire to you could run up on tornado damage and have to help people with first aid. And they always recommend binoculars too, because a lot of times there's something that you need to look closely at. When you're trying to identify a tornado, if it's close enough to you, if you're looking at a funnel cloud or a tornado close enough to you, it'll be obvious that it's rotating very quickly like a blender. But if it's a mile or 2 away, you may not be able to tell if it's rotating or not. And there's a lot of clouds that can fool you because they look like tornadoes, but if they're not spinning, then they don't count. So binoculars can be helpful. And the other thing too is you need to know your local area and ask yourself, especially if you have family at home, if the storm's coming in your general direction, would you be better off staying at home and just taking pictures of it there versus going out and chasing? in case there should be damage to your house or something like that. And you should strongly consider vista chasing, which is something that Ron and I do. And what we do there is we know several vistas that look off to the west around our within 30 minutes of our house, and we try to look at the radar and project when the storms are coming to one of those vistas, and then we'll just go up there and shoot from up there because it keeps you from getting stuck in the trees and not being able to see what's going on. Next. So Pennsylvania can look like a plain sometimes. This is an example of one of those vista chases. This was a chase that I did last October. I got really lucky by going down to Indian Lookout, which is about a half hour away from State College. It's a very high mountain that looks out. You have a pretty clear view all the way from the south to the north practically. And I was able to watch this lightning come through the valley, striking down in the valley while the sunset was off the left. And that was a really successful chase, although I think it was partially luck, because since it's 30 minutes away, there's assumptions you have to make on the radar as to whether or not it's going to come there, and it could have been on the other side of the mountain and I wouldn't have gotten anything. But you can get lucky with photography of storms in Pennsylvania. Next. If you're going to storm chase in Pennsylvania, you want to coordinate and interact online. This is an example of a Google map that one of the folks on our Pennsylvania Storm Chasers group on Facebook put together, and this is basically listing out the different vistas that are in Pennsylvania, and if you were to click on one, you would get information about there, which direction it faces, how good the cell phone reception, are the trees in the way, and that sort of thing. And that way, if you're a storm chaser and you're out and about in different people's areas, you'll know where the places are that you can get a good view. Next. I mentioned the Pennsylvania Storm Chasers group. We have some people from that tonight. Raise your hand if you are from the Storm Chaser group. A couple people, yeah. This is a group on Facebook. You can look it up just by typing in Pennsylvania Storm Chasers 2011. And what we have is about 200 people in here that follow the weather closely in Pennsylvania. When they're going out to chase, they tell us where they're going, and when they take pictures and video, they upload them here, and we discuss the current storms, where they're heading, and things like that. So that kind of interaction can be really helpful. Next. So some resources: Pennsylvania Storm Chasers 2011 group on Facebook. Facebook.com/AccuWeather. That's a plug for AccuWeather since I run that page too. That will provide you with weather forecast information worldwide as far as severe weather events, and you can also upload your pictures and videos there, and then sometimes we use the pictures in a news story or in a video that gets put on the local AccuWeather channel or something like that. And then you can read my blog at weathermatrix.accuweather.com, and whenever I do a storm chase locally or I've seen somebody who's taken some cool pictures, I'll put that up on there. And again, Henry, that I mentioned earlier, Henry's a severe weather forecaster specifically, so he always has an opinion on how the thunderstorms are going to be in Pennsylvania that day. You can reach him on the web at mediamadness.accuweather.com. And also your local National Weather Service office page. These are the people, the government agency that's responsible for issuing the warnings, tornado warnings and watches and that sort of thing. Your local office, which around here would be Pittsburgh, they're the ones who provide the storm spotter training. And what they do there is, once you get educated on what you're looking at in a storm, they give you a spotter number and a telephone number, and then you're able to call in reports of severe weather to them whenever you see it. And that really does help with them issuing the warnings. Is that the last slide? All right. So that's all for the slideshow. Are there any questions from the audience?
The 1985, the long track storm, how wide was the path of destruction on that? Because it looked pretty big on that.
How wide was it? I had that in my PowerPoint and I cut it out into space. I'm not sure, but it was pretty wide for Pennsylvania standards. I know it was on the ground for 69 miles. Which is really insane for Pennsylvania, and it certainly proved once and for all that tornadoes can happen in the mountains, because it was basically buzzing up and down the mountains up to 2,000 feet up there. Anybody else? Yeah. In 1985? I'm sorry? In the 1985 tornado, the fortunate thing about it was that it went mostly through forest land. It did destroy a number of houses in a couple of small towns. And actually last year, Henry and I went up to Parker Dam, which is where the tornado started, and we met with the Boy Scouts up there that were out in a camp when the tornado hit. And the trees fell all around their campsite there, but they survived it, so they came back to tell their story. One of the things about that tornado, when you add the low visibility in Pennsylvania to the fact that this was a really wide tornado, people may have not even recognized it coming because it didn't look like a little tubular twister like you'll see in the movie. It was so wide that you might not even recognize it as a tornado as it came towards you. And that may have been the problem with some of these really strong tornadoes that have hit this year too. Obviously in the United States this year there's been over 500 people killed by tornadoes. But the hope is that the storm chasers who are out there in the plains can collect enough data that meteorologists will be able to better forecast the storms. Because meteorologists will admit that they still don't really know how tornadoes form exactly. And for every thunderstorm that starts to rotate and looks like it's going to produce a tornado, only a small percentage actually do, and we're still not really sure why. But once it's on the radar and confirmed by a spotter, it's fairly easy to track it and put out the warnings ahead of time. Any other questions?
Could you explain the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning?
Sure. Tornado watch is something that's put out ahead of time between 1 or 2 hours and as much as 6 or 8 hours ahead of time. And it's for a really large area. And when the meteorologists are looking at those computer forecast models, that's the area that they think tornadoes are possible in. But there's nothing on the ground, and they can't be more specific than that. When a tornado does hit the ground or is shown on radar, then they issue a tornado warning, which usually only has a few minutes lead time, and that means that the tornado is headed towards you. So if you hear that your county or your city is in a warning, then you need to take cover immediately. On a day when a tornado watch is issued, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're aware of the weather, that you're monitoring for tornado warnings on television or NOAA weather radio. Make sure you know where all your family is and what your plan is. You need to have a family plan if a tornado hits. For example, if there was a lot of damage and you were not able to get back to your house and everybody was out somewhere, where would you meet? So pick a place to meet in case a tornado does come through, and have some sort of a family plan. Know what your school's plan is for tornadoes for your kids and that sort of thing. Tornado watches are fairly rare in Pennsylvania, but we have had a few of them this year. Anything else?
I live in a second floor apartment. Now, if there's a storm coming within my windshield, where would I go? Where would I be safe living in a second floor apartment? Is it a stairwell?
Yeah, if you can't get down to the bottom floor of a structure, the stairwell is probably the next best thing. You could also be in a bathroom, because generally the pipes in the bathroom reinforce the rooms, and a lot of times if you look at some of these pictures from the Plains tornadoes this year, the bathroom is the only thing that's left, or maybe the stairwell, because those are the places that are more fortified. But you definitely want to try to get a place of safety. And if you go on the American Red Cross website, they're going to be talking to you soon here. They have specific recommendations for what to do if you're in a car. There's a couple of different things you could do, and it's too complicated for me to get in here too, but it's definitely worth reading, because you could have to make that sort of decision. All right? Yeah.
When there was the recent tornado in Hempfield Township about a month and a half, 2 months ago, was there a lot of lead time on the radar that they were able to see that there was a tornado coming, or was that really kind of a sudden thing that really just popped up out of nowhere?
I'm not sure about Hempfield specifically, but most of the tornadoes that I've looked at this year have had pretty good lead time. The question, of course, is how much lead time is good. You know, can you get ready in 1 minute or 10 minutes, or do you need longer? There's some people that say that if you give people too much lead time, that it's actually bad, because they don't get ready as quick as they normally would, and they get involved in other things. But generally, the National Weather Service is able to give, I think, between 10 and 15 minutes. lead time, and for the most part, that is pretty good.